Hey, how's it? If I told you to plant out your tomatoes in your garden in August, would you say, oh, I see that's reasonable, or would you tell me to fly a kite? This is one of the big things that I've struggled with as a beginner gardener. I didn't really know when to plant what. Do I plant my tomatoes in September? Do I plant them out in July? I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing. So I want to help you guys out, not make the same mistakes as me. By the end of this video, I want you guys to have the tools available to be able to determine when to plant stuff according to your climate. Therefore, I'm not going to relate anything to months. I'm not going to say August plant this, July plant this. Instead, what I'm going to discuss is the optimum growing temperature range for plant families and a few individual plants. I'm also going to go over a bit of a spreadsheet that I've been running, and I'll make that available to you guys so that you can sort of modify it, make it your own. I want to help you guys out, make it a little bit easier, because there's so much information out on the internet, right? So it can be difficult to know what is applicable to your context, what's right and what's wrong. That's pretty much what I want to say. Let's get straight into the video. Okay, so first things first, let's just quickly go through the families. So which families require hotter temperatures for germination and maturation, and which families require cooler temperatures for obviously then germination and maturation. So just as a general overview, this is an average temperature range of the optimum growing temperatures. So your family of legumes would require an average temperature range of between 15 and 21 degrees Celsius. Obviously, the individual plants within their families will have their own requirements. You also do get then your hotter climate variants and your cooler climate variants. So again, this is just an average temperature range. This is essentially your baseline. So what I'm going to discuss is you're going to then know, okay, generally this family requires this temperature range, generally this family requires this sort of temperature range. So your legumes would require an average optimum temperature growing range of between 15 and 21 degrees Celsius. Your family of Amaranthaceae would require between 10 and 29. That is a very large temperature range. It's basically your beetroot, spinach, and your Swiss chard. That's actually why there's such a temperature range. Your spinach actually requires slightly cooler weather, and your beetroot requires slightly warmer weather. But again, this is an average, so you'll have your outliers. Next is Asteraceae. So that's all of your lettuces and stuff. So that's an average optimum growing range between 12 and 18 degrees Celsius. So that's actually a very short temperature range compared to the previous one. So everyone knows that spinach is a bit of a tender crop. You require slightly cooler temperatures, and that's actually why it has such a short temperature range. So generally you would want to try and grow your lettuce in either your shoulder seasons, or you would want to at least try and we discussed infrastructure last week, so you would want to then put it like in a hoop house or a greenhouse or something, just to try and put it in a more stable environment. Okay, next is essentially, what is this? Carrot and celery, so it's Apiaceae, an average temperature range of between 15 and 21. Likewise, your group of alliums is also between 15 and 21 degrees Celsius. So obviously then your alliums is your onions, your leeks, spring onions, garlic and stuff. Brassicaceae, so this is one of the traditional cooler growing crops. It's between 13 and 20 degrees Celsius. Then we've got some of the hotter crops, which is your Solanaceae family. So think all of your nightshades, right? It's your brinjals, your tomatoes, your hot peppers, etc., etc. That is an average optimum growing range of between 21 degrees Celsius and 29 degrees Celsius. So you can see how these families are sort of like playing around with these temperature ranges. Okay, we've got, I might say this wrong, but it's Poaceae. So that is it's corn, not potatoes. Potatoes are nightshades, by the way. Okay, so your Poaceae, your corn, between 13 and 24 degrees Celsius. This is a little bit of a funny one for me. Look, I don't have much experience growing corn, I will admit. But corn is also known traditionally as a hot weather crop, so that's a little bit of a strange one. There's a few considerations that we'll discuss a bit later, and that might be why, but it is quite interesting to know. And like I said, this is very, it's dependent on the varieties within the families that you grow. So take this with a grain of salt, but this at least gives you a bit of an idea of what to be able to plant. Okay, and then the last family that I want to discuss is just cucurbitaceae. So it's your cucurbits, your cucumbers, pumpkins, squash. That's basically what it is. That is also a very large temperature range of between 19 and 30 degrees Celsius. So also a traditional hot weather family. Okay, so now that you know sort of when each family is applicable for what temperature range, so how does that still help me? There's a bit of information that I still need. So what you would essentially do then is you would quickly Google sort of, what did I Google? Basically then what you do is you would actually Google your area, try and get the weather data for your area, right? So you'll Google Joburg climatic data, historic, whatever, something to that effect, right? And then you'll find a table with these weather stations, because they keep all this data. They'll keep min temperatures, max temperatures, average temperature ranges. It'll be typically over a year. They should also have your rainfall patterns, humidity patterns, and all of that sort of stuff. And it's really useful because once you have that, right, once you know, okay, in January my average temperature range is between 19 and a half degrees Celsius, right? My minimum temperature in January is 14 and a half degrees Celsius, but my maximum temperature is 24 and a half degrees Celsius. Then you'll know, okay, well, out of these families, I can be growing the following, right? And then let's say we're looking at June, right? My average temperature is 9.8 degrees Celsius with a min of 3.5 degrees Celsius, max of 16 degrees Celsius. So I can't be growing my squash and my tomatoes in June, bro. So I'm going to have to wait a little bit, right? So that's what you're going to do. You have the information of the family. Now you've got the information for your sort of your area. Obviously it's going to change. So the best thing to do is just Google historic climatic data for X location, and then you'll be able to get this out. I've got this spreadsheet running. I'll clean it up because it looks a little bit dog awful. I'll make it available to you guys, and you can modify it to your preferences, and at least then it'll be a little bit easier to know when to grow what. At least something that I've really struggled with, and I'm trying to help you guys out to not struggle as much, trying to make the process a little bit more enjoyable. So yeah, but that's what I would do, right? And then from there, like I said, as well, it is very variety dependent. Some varieties within a family requires slightly hotter or slightly cooler than the average, and then you'll just plan that accordingly. So then you'll know, okay, my spinach won't be growing in December when, when my average temperature is like 24 degrees Celsius, but I can grow my beetroot at that point in time. And likewise, I can't grow my spinach in July or June, but I can grow my spinach then. I think I just said beetroot in July, whatever. I think my point is sort of made, I hope. But at least that is what I would do, right? Okay, so there is a few considerations that we need to discuss. What actually matters for germination and maturation is not really environment, your ambient air temperature, is actually your soil temperature. The whole reason is, the roots are in the soil, right? And the air temperature fluctuates so much. Plants have obviously adapted to be able to cope with some fluctuation over a period of time. Obviously, a sudden cold spell or a sudden hot spell is going to be potentially disastrous to the plants. Even humans, we get cold too quickly, we complain, we get a little bit sore or whatever, and if we get too hot too quickly, then it can also be fatal. So likewise with plants, they are living organisms, it's the same sort of thing. But yeah, so the soil temperature is actually the big thing. So in spring, right, so let's say your average temperature is starting to climb. Maybe for the past week or so it's been 15 degrees Celsius on average, with your minimum temperature being maybe 10 degrees Celsius. It might not be the right time to yet plant out your hot water crops. Your soil temperature will be slightly cooler or slightly hotter, obviously depending on the time of the year. Now there are ways to combat this, obviously with climatic control. What you can also do, especially in the spring, it is recommended that you pull off the mulch so that the sun can actually heat up the soil directly. Obviously you want to try and at least keep it moist so that the organisms and stuff that's in that soil doesn't die off. At least try and protect it that way and keep it a little bit cooler. The other thing is, by adding moisture to the soil, it is more it can readily soak up more water and retain that heat, because then obviously water, it's a good heat sink, right, as opposed to just bare soil. So that is also something that you can keep in mind. And then the second consideration that you want to think about is your first frost and your last frost date. That's also going to give you a bit of an indication of when you can plant out what. So with regards to your last frost date, okay, so your last frost date is going to essentially signal when you can start planting your hot weather crops outside in the garden without sort of having to put any extra inputs in, potentially like climate control. The whole reason is, all your last frost date is the last date at which your area is likely to experience some form of a killing frost, right? That's obviously going to be very dependent on your location. Some places it snows. Here in Joburg it doesn't snow unless something's like really going wrong. So there's going to be very dependent on your area, and that sort of information you would find when you Google out your historic climate data. Your first frost date, right? Your first frost date is the first date at which your area would likely encounter a killing frost for the season. So that would actually signal the last time that you can sort of plant stuff out in your garden. Out of all the research that I've done, there's a little bit of there isn't really too much agreement of what your sort of timelines, but generally between 6 and 8 weeks prior to your first frost date, that is the last point that you actually want to be sowing seeds outside without climate control. So that means, let's say, for example, us here in Joburg, right? Our first frost date is generally the 1st of June. Again, the first frost date is an average, right? So our first frost date is on the 1st of June, meaning that 6 to 8 weeks before then, that's really when I want to be planting or sowing seeds out in the garden. So that means my late sow for, let's say, beans would then be the 2nd of April. Right? That is first frost date minus 6 or 8 weeks. And then you'll take that through. Obviously then you want to be considerate of the families themselves. You don't want to be sowing tomato seeds 6 to 8 weeks before your first frost date. That's going to be disastrous to your tomato seeds. So you do want to keep that in mind. Okay, so now with that said, right, now you know your first frost date. Now to know when the last sort of safe time to be sowing seeds outside, you're going to work backwards. So like I said, if your first frost date is on the 1st of June, you're going to subtract the amount of weeks required depending on what crop you're sowing. You're going to deduct that out, and okay, so on the 2nd of April, that's the last time that I can sow my bush bean seeds, right? Because, right, that time period, what you're going to deduct, that is essentially your germination and maturation time. So if your seed takes roughly 10 days to germinate and requires 2 months to mature before you can harvest, that means 2 months prior to your first frost date, that's the last time you can sow your seeds. So April, May, June, you frost. Okay. Now, obviously, depending on what you want to sow, depends on what that period is. Some plants mature faster, some plants mature slightly slower. What you also need to keep in mind, something that I failed to take into consideration with my second sowing of corn, is it's getting colder, leading up to winter, so you're going to have a slower growth rate. Again, it's knowledgeable, we all know this, right? But sometimes you forget to apply what you know. So yeah, I forgot, but whatever. At least I still got something. But you do want to keep that in mind. So if you're taking chances like me, and you're planting corn like 3 months before winter, then okay, potentially I might not get something if I don't protect these guys. Because if there's a lot of rain, a lot of overcast days, the sun intensity is low, the amount of sun hours is low, and everything's getting drowned out, and it's cold and it's windy, and the plants aren't happy, just like me, it's cold, you might be in for a bad time. So you do want to keep that in mind. And then obviously the opposite, right? Coming into spring with your first frost date, you might want to give it a bit of time for any like tomatoes, anything that's sensitive to frost. You might want to give it a few weeks after your first frost date. Well, what a lot of people do is they'll sow and germinate their seeds indoors in a more stable environment, and then they'll plant them out like 2-3 weeks after the first frost date has passed. What you can also do, I also indicated in the infrastructure video, that what I've done to some actually pretty good success, especially with my sunflowers, is just putting a cut 2-liter bottle over the seeds, because then the seeds themselves have got enough moisture, they've got enough sunlight and heat, and they'll grow up. The little seedlings are protected from all the birds that like to eat all your sunflower seedlings, so that generally works pretty good. Then the only thing that you need to do then is harden them off, open up the bottle cap every day, or loosen it, or poke a few extra holes in it, or whatever. Otherwise you're going to remove that environment, and then the seedlings can go into shock, because suddenly the environment is very different. It'll be less humid, it will be colder, there'll be a lot of wind. It's just a shock to the system. Okay, and the last consideration, it's your chill time. I don't know what plants require chill hours. I know, for example, your stone fruits, right? But that's more like apricots and peaches and trees, bro. But like garlic, right? It requires chill hours. So that you will then plant, instead of planting it in the summer, because the summer is when it will grow the best. Because of the chill hours, you would actually then sow those out in winter, or after the coldest part of winter, or before then, and you'll just bury them a little bit deeper, because they require a certain amount of chill hours for them to sort of, activate or something. Like they need to go into hibernation. I don't know the whole science behind it yet, and I'll let you guys know at some point in the future, but that's my understanding. So some things actually require chill hours, like garlic. But that's really the last consideration that I'm aware of. So that's basically the video, right? It's not super difficult, but trying to get all this information together, it can be a little bit overwhelming and very confusing if you're starting out and you don't know what's going on. At least I struggle with this a lot. So I'm going to make the spreadsheet available. I'm going to tidy it up. I'll make it available to you guys, and you can modify it accordingly. But I'm hoping that this at least helps you guys out. I didn't see a point in going through every single crop. I thought it'd be better to do an overview of everything, because then you're going to have this information in the spreadsheet instead of me talking for like half an hour, which I do too often, to be honest. I'm trying to reduce the length of these videos. Even now, I'm just droning on. So I hope this was informative. Take a look at this spreadsheet, modify it, Google your historic climate data, and you'll sort of know what's going on. Pop it into the spreadsheet, and you'll have a bit of a better understanding of what's going on. So yeah, if you like hearing me ramble on about random gardening stuff, talking way too long about things that I really should, I encourage you to check out my playlist.